Welcome to another episode of 30 Minutes in the New Testament. 30 Minutes in the New Testament is a 1517 podcast network podcast. You can go to 1517.org/podcast and check out all the other podcasts that are living over there. While you're over there, make sure you check out everything else that 1517 is doing. You go to the events page. I think at the time we're recording this, there is like a tiny amount of tickets left, like a few tickets left for the regional event in Bentonville, Arkansas. They won't be there very long, so make sure that you grab them. Those locals, see, they drag their feet, and then they scoop them up at the last minute. And if you're not one of those locals, don't let them do it to you. Don't let it happen. So get those tickets and can hang out with all three of us. We'll all three be there hanging out. We'd love to see you. Also, while you're at the website, of course, you want to hit that donate link in the corner there and become a contributor. Because how are we going to keep all this stuff free? If you don't hold the rope a little bit. And so we would love to have you jump on board, keep all the things that 1517 is doing free for the world to consume. And if you're one of the people that do that, thank you very much. You do indeed make it possible. Guys, we are in Matthew chapter 22. We're towards the end of this. And it is a series of things. I mean, Eric has said that this is Jesus trying to pick a fight. Indeed, we've seen him try to do that. He's told a couple of on-the-nose parables that it seems are, designed to convey a very certain truth, and also at the same time designed to really, really let the Pharisees know that he's not there to play ball and to really get under their skin. He has successfully done that, so much so that they resort to aligning with their natural enemy to try to trap him in a question about taxes. That doesn't go well. So what do they go to next? Well, they're gonna have another uniting of parties, and that's the Pharisees and the Sadducees are gonna try to come together and see if they can get him on the resurrection. Let's try it. We got there. What do you see with both of these things, the taxes and this resurrection thing, is they've got to try to break up this support. Anything to diminish this support. So if it's he's going to say the wrong thing about taxes, and some people are going to get upset. He's going to have to come down on one side or the other about this resurrection, and people are going to get upset. Whatever it takes, we gotta diminish the support that this guy has.
Yep, that's exactly right. And so we pick it up at verse 23. It says, "The same day Sadducees came to him, who say that there is no resurrection." Now, side note, if you've ever wondered why it was that the Sadducees didn't believe in a resurrection, like most other Jews believed in a general resurrection sort of at the end of the age or the end of the world, they did not. But the reason why they did not is because the Sadducees were strictly adherent to the Pentateuch alone. And if you read the Pentateuch without any of the other Old Testament books, then it is sort of difficult to see the theme of resurrection in the first 5 books of the Bible. You certainly can see it when you look back at it with all the other books informing you. But by itself, it's not real predominant, and so that was their reason for rejecting the resurrection, just as a little historical side note for you. Anyhow, they ask him a question, verse 24, saying, "Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no offspring left his wife to his brother. So too the second and third, down to the 7th. After them all, the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, of the 7, whose wife will she be? For they all had her." So before we go any further, fellas, what are they trying to do by bringing up this scenario? What's happening here?
Well, one, this isn't like just an arbitrary scenario. As they're not making this stuff up, right? So this is like kind of how the law worked, that you would indeed have to do this. Mm-hmm. I think it's in Tobit. I might be wrong about that, but anyway, some apocryphal literature. We actually have this exact story or a version of this story laid out. And so they also aren't pulling this story from nowhere. So this was it's more than just a hypothetical situation, I guess is what I'm saying. Because you could be like, well, this sounds pretty ridiculous. But they're pulling from an actual story that had been passed down. And
you see examples of this, too, in Genesis with Judah's sons.
Yes, yeah, you do. And they assume Jesus knows about this story. And so they're trying to get him with what they would consider, to be religious writings. Like, what about this story then? What do you do with this guy? And that's what they're doing. So the idea here is like, here's a story where if you believe in the resurrection and you also have this law, well, then how does this work out? and their thing would be like, it doesn't matter because there isn't a resurrection. Of course, my dad would always say the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection. That's why they were sad, you see.
Yeah, I knew you were going there. I knew it was coming.
I knew someone.
So
I knew
good.
one of us was going to have to do it.
I'm just glad you beat me to it. That's all.
Yeah. Hey, it's a way to remember the difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. It's a nice little way to do that. But,
it is.
But that's what's going on there. They're trying to use some religious text to make a point that, like, if he says, the resurrection is true, like, they think that they've got just this ironclad example of or problem that cannot be resolved in the resurrection.
Well, I think it's worth pointing out again, which we pointed out before when Jesus is asked about divorce. The reason that this was part of the law was not a legalistic reason. It was a compassionate reason.
Yeah, the protection of the woman.
Yeah, they were protecting this woman from becoming basically a prostitute or a beggar.
Yeah.
And the way you protect her is you put her under another man's protection. Mm-hmm. And so if you are, this is one of the illustrations where family in the Old Testament and in Jesus' time, it extends out and it stays with you. You don't, when you grow up, your brother doesn't usually move 2,000 miles away and you talk to him once a year.
That's right.
You're in the same town. You're maybe even in the same sort of household still.
Yep.
And so marrying your sister-in-law in order to, because she's now part of your family, to protect her after the death of your brother is a compassionate thing. And once again, now the Sadducees instead of the Pharisees are trying to use this compassionate thing and turn it into a legalistic trap for Jesus.
That's right.
And he's going to do what he always does with these attempts at legalistic traps when it's concerning the law. And he's going to just shoot it down. And in this case, how he's going to shoot it down, he's going to shoot it down on the basis of what will actually happen in the resurrection.
Yeah.
But he could shoot it down, and I guess my point is he could shoot it down another way too. He could go at the premise here. For them, they're kind of acting like the premise is the tie between the sex of the man and the woman that she's now married to, and when in reality it's really for her protection that this is occurring.
I know this. I mean, has anyone thought about investigating this woman for murder? Because that is a question I have.
It's a weird story.
Because, how much poison does this lady?
Some real bad luck, man.
I mean, if I am brother number seven, I got to tell you, I am like, guys, listen, like, there's got to be a limit to this, like, because it seems like
if I'm brother number 4, I think I'd be there.
Like, I want to do it. I really, I want to do the right thing here, but like, are we sure she's not poisoning everyone? Yeah. Because this is wild coincidence.
Yes, that's right. But Jesus is going to undercut the whole premise of their argument here when he says in verse 29, "But Jesus answered them, 'You are wrong because you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God.
Ouch.
For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living.' And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching."
Don't you love when that's always the end? Like, he's drops
Yeah, they're always like,
and everybody's like,
yes, their mind is just blown.
blown minds, man.
Well, so the first thing he points out that's pretty obvious is they are assuming that marriage will continue after when the resurrection has happened, and he just undercuts that instantly. And so it becomes a non-issue. Like, suddenly, it's like, no. Well, there's not going to be any marriage, so that problem's solved. But then the second thing that he undercuts is their belief that the first 5 books of the law do not talk about resurrection or allude to resurrection, because notice he says, present tense, that God is the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. It's a present tense statement even after they had died. He still is their God, which implies that they still exist. And that's why the crowd reacts with astonishment, because they can't really say anything to that.
Yeah, I think there's 2 kind of like 3 astonishing things that happen here. So it starts, so imagine you're the crowd, and so they can obviously hear this, and the Sadducees come up and they deliver this question. And the first thing that Jesus says is, you're wrong because you don't know the scriptures or the power of God. That was the first thing that the crowd's like, stand back, hold on, whoa, stand back, guys. Like it just got real. Like he just said, well, I could just end it right there and be like, well, your guys' problem is that you don't know the Bible and you don't know God. That's your problem here.
Ooh. Would it be fair to say, skipping forward in the New Testament a little bit, that he's saying you don't know the scriptures and you don't know the gospel?
Yeah. Like you don't know about the resurrection. Yeah.
Because we know the gospel is the power of God for salvation.
All right.
Yeah, for sure. And then to say like, all right, there's not going to be marriage. Shocker. By the way, there's a lot of Christians out there who like are not that overly familiar with their scriptures that probably have this idea that me and my wife have our souls knit for all eternity or some stuff. And
I would say I don't know why my wife really dislikes this passage.
Yeah. So there's that, and then he does this. Like also as Eric was saying. Just in the language used about talking about God and whose God he is, like you have this implication that like these people are not dead but living. Therefore, the resurrection is there, and they're astonished by all of this, like the totality of this. And so there is this sort of like triple own that goes on here. One, just insulting them. Two, then explaining that marriage doesn't exist in the resurrection, and then three, saying, but the resurrection does exist in the early books of the Old Testament.
Yeah, it is quite impressive what he is able to do each time they challenge him. But they're not done. They're going to give it their best shot.
At the end of the day, marriage, as given to Adam and Eve in the garden, is given for the purpose of, originally, because it's just them, right? Mm-hmm. Companionship, and then the making of more little people that are in God's image.
Yeah.
Right? And then that gets put forward to, okay, get married and have babies until the earth is full and you have dominion over it.
Yeah.
The implication here, I think, is that, okay, when the end of all things comes and the renewal of all things then comes, that mission is complete.
Yeah.
Right? And so in the new heaven and in the new earth, you're not going to need to be given into marriage because we're not going to need to fill the earth and have dominion over it because this mission will have been done. That's why I came, right?
Yeah. And companionship will not be an issue.
And companionship will not be an issue because you won't, especially because one of the reasons it's difficult, why you need to try to have companionship with one other sinful person is because that's hard enough. To have true companionship with a multitude of other people because of how much of a sinner you are and they are is extremely difficult. It's why you can't actually have tons and tons and tons of people you call good friends, right?
It's also the case here too that of course marriage was always meant to be a picture of the relationship that Christ has with his church,
which will be perfected in
glory. And we know that the book of
glory.
Revelation portrays us as his bride.
Yes.
That will be married to him for eternity, and so there's no need for any of this marriage.
Perfected in glory, even our relationships with one another won't be limited by our sin, and can be perfect, whatever that means. We don't really know. Can be perfect, and the mission of marriage will have been completed.
Yeah, and I think maybe the important thing, if it is something, maybe you are like Scott's wife, and you're like, but I don't like the way that is. I get it. Like I get that. Like, right now. That doesn't hit you like in a positive way, but what you can be assured of is that this is no loss.
Right.
Yes.
It's no loss.
This is gain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You are losing nothing here.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right. And so, verse 34, the Pharisees are not done trying to go after Jesus. It says, but when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, which probably gave them a little satisfaction, by the way. It's not like the Pharisees and the Sadducees were
He's been
great
coming
pals.
after us for chapters now.
So they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets.
What? That second one's not actually in the law.
Yeah, but here's what's great about this. I like that. And one of them, a lawyer, they're like, oh, let's bring the lawyer in, and he'll ask him a question. You know what this tells you is that I think it tells you this anyway, because this seems like, well, this isn't like a good trap. like, I can answer this question. What kind of question is this? How are you going to trap him with this? It tells you that unlike us, who have Jesus sort of distilling the commands of God down to these two things, it wasn't necessarily a settled thing, like which commandment is the greatest commandment. Like we can have conversations.
Yeah.
They didn't just go with like the numbering and like this numbering is in it, is done in importance. That's not like so. He's going to go be like, hey, let's make him choose one commandment to place above other commandments, and maybe we can get him that way and say like, oh, really? You think that that's the great one? And what Jesus does is just takes the entirety of the Decalogue and just condenses it down to these two things, right? So he gets them in this way.
Which is true, too. I mean, we've talked about the two tables of the law many times on this podcast, and basically the first table is about our relationship to God, and the second table is about our relationship to our neighbor.
He's taking the first three and calling it the first one, and the last seven and calling it the second one. This is all he's doing here. But one of the greatest things about this is, this is one of the things I think people need to realize when they read this. Originally, God gives the Israelites, vis-a-vis the Israelites, us, the 10 Commandments, right? And there's 10 of them. And any time they are confused about the 10, the desire is to add more, right?
Yes.
And this still happens. I always said that 10 Commandments were good enough for God, but when Jordan Peterson came out with his book, he had to add 2 more and call it 12 rules, right? So anytime we get confused about the 10, our inclination is to add to them. And, 10 doesn't seem like it's clarifying enough, so let's keep going. When Jesus is asked to clarify the 10, he doesn't add to it; he boils it down to 2.
Yeah,
and I think that is so great. It is just so on point for Jesus to take the first 3 and say, "Oh, this can be summed up in 1," and the last 7 and say, "This can be summed up in 1 too." Here you go.
Yeah. We always want to expand where Jesus distills.
Right.
He distills this stuff down and says like, and it is a way of just saying like, "Hey guys, it's not that complicated."
Yeah.
Like, now. It's impossible, but it's not complicated to explain what these things really are.
Yeah. Honor parents, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, have a good attitude towards one another, try not to covet what belongs to other people. Okay, that's love your neighbor as yourself.
Yep.
I think there's also like an implicit assumption behind them asking him this question, at least in my mind, that one of the things that they accuse him of all the time is being like an antinomian. Like not really believing in the law. And so the test here is to see if he's going to be faithful to actually expound what the law teaches. And he does do that. They can't argue with him. I mean, this is a perfect summation of what the law actually says.
When asked, Jesus found it less useful to delineate more uses of the law and to say that the law, as he does here, on these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets. The law does, at the end of the day, one thing, which is convict. And it convicts you by showing you that you do not love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and that you do not love your neighbor as yourself.
Do you think that they were really, really, really certain that he wasn't going to say the Sabbath? They were like, we know one thing about this guy. He's not going to the most important law.
We've heard enough about him in the Sabbath. Yeah.
It sounded like from the last one, he's maybe not going to say, don't commit adultery, too. From the last time they asked him about adultery, that's probably not going to rank as number 1.
Yeah. They're probably like, rank him real quick. They're like whispering, like, dude, the Sabbath's coming in dead last with this guy.
Oh, yeah.
So it continues. Now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them a question, saying, "What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he?" They said to him, "The son of David." He said to them, "How is it then that David in the Spirit calls him Lord, saying, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet?' If then David calls him Lord, how is he his son?" And no one was able to answer him a word, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. So the mic has been dropped.
Dude, here's what's great about this, and this is instructive. You want something instructive? Here it is. The Pharisees come to Jesus and they say, "What about the law?" And then Jesus says, "What about the Christ?" Like, this is the move that he makes, right? Like, they want to talk about the law, and he answers their question. But then, like, when he finally is going to ask them a question here, he says, All right, how about this? You asked me what I think about the law. Here's what I want to know. What do you think about the Christ? And that's a great line out of the mouth of Jesus.
You know what? I'm stealing that.
There you go.
It's a good thing to steal, considering that it came from the Lord.
Because you know what I get asked about a lot anytime I get interviewed by other people?
The law.
The law.
Yes.
Yeah.
The next time I get asked a question about the law, I'm going to say, answer me this.
What do you think
What
about
do you
the
think
Christ?
about the Christ?
Yes, correct.
Oh, yeah. I'm full on stealing that.
It's not a bad diversion tactic. Get to the main thing. Get to the pointy end of the stick, as we like to say around 1517 world.
Yep.
What do you have to say about Jesus?
And this is a great move that he makes here, because what he is doing here is they have this idea about David, and Jesus is saying, like, hey, you want to know something weird about David is that this Messiah is both his son and his Lord. Explain that one. Explain that one to me real quick.
Riddle me this, Batman.
Well, I mean, and this is what they will arrest him for. I mean, they very clearly understand what he's claiming about himself.
Likely why they asked him no more questions after the stage.
Yeah, they've got proof.
They've got the evidence. They're just compiling it. They're going to the prosecutors to see if they can make a case, and eventually the answer is going to be yes.
Well, and he's also making himself eternal here, right? Like, so and these guys aren't stupid people. Like, they understand that he's speaking of himself. They understand that he just did say that he is both David's son, and son of David, and that he is David's Lord, and in doing so has like named himself not just to be the Messiah, but to be God.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty astonishing move, and I mean, we do know the Talmud actually backs up what happens in the Gospels, because it talks about Jesus, and they say that he was arrested and ultimately put to death for two things: blasphemy and sorcery. Well, that makes a whole lot of sense and lines up perfectly with what the Gospels reveal. I mean, what they call sorcery is his miracles, and what they call blasphemy is him quoting the scriptures that are about himself.
Yeah. I can tell you this. They didn't ask Jesus any more questions after this, and we're about to get into it in chapter 23, but Jesus doesn't stop talking, because now that he's like put them on blast, you're going to have, what's referred to as the 7 woes, and they are brutal, dude. Like, if you want to know how Jesus really feels about the religious establishment, get ready, because he is going to let you know exactly how he feels about them.
Yep, you're exactly right, and it is a wonderful example of what it sounds like to preach the law with some teeth, with some fangs.
Well, and here's the thing about this too. This law is it's served up differently in this sense, that what his condemnation of the Pharisees and what's about to happen is not the same as saying, you're supposed to not covet, you're supposed to not steal, you're supposed to not lie, or this kind of stuff. What he's doing here is he's laying down an indictment of them refusing to preach the gospel, right? Like to refusing to be heralds of good news. And this is his primary beef. He's running across all kinds of people that are law breakers. This is different. If you want to know about how Jesus feels, or how God feels, about someone whose job it is, in this case, they are to be like heralding the promises of God, that and telling the good news of the coming Messiah and all this stuff. When they advocate that and like they decide to do something else, if you want to know how Jesus feels about like that sort of mission drift or whatever you want to call it, you're going to get it right here.
Well, he just told them that they know neither the scriptures nor the gospel.
Yeah. And he's going to go after them for it.
Yep.
So Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do. For they preach but do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens hard to bear, and they lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. They do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long, and they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues, and greetings in the marketplaces, and being called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And call no man your father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven. Neither be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Christ, me." The greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted.
Well, that ties up the last part of 22 when he's asking them about the Christ. You wonder who it is. You have one instructor. It's the Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is very difficult for those sects and cults that claim that Jesus never claimed to be God.
Oh yeah. Like it's right there. And I mean, this is honestly, I know, Scott, I know you and I joke about this all the time, but like, I mean, when Jesus decides to bring out the law, like, there's nobody, including Moses, that brings it out more full force than Jesus does. I mean, this is what I mean, I'm listening to Eric
Because he
read that,
gets
and
to the motives of their heart.
there's
He
things in this.
exposes them.
I mean, I don't care about any of my fringes being long or whatever, but there's a lot of stuff in here that if you're like, if you're a pastor or if you're a teacher in the
Or a
church
professor.
or a theologian, like there's some stuff in here that
There's some love in the place of honor.
there's just things in here, man, that if you're like paying attention, you're like, like that hurts.
Yep.
Yeah, no, this gets at the reality of who we are by showing who the Pharisees are, and that's at the end of the day who it is. I mean, they have a very particular burden that they're running around burdening people with the law and not exposing themselves with the law. And they're not even doing it as preachers, right? It's one thing for a preacher to expose his congregation and not always include himself in that, and that's a whole different ballgame in some way. But they do this to everybody, and they do it by the seats that they demand and the honor that they demand, and the things that they do that seem to be in accordance with the law. They make sure other people see, and this is us. I mean, at the end of the day, you can't get away from being implicated here. I can't get away from it. You can't get away from it.
And at
the end of the day, that's the point of preaching the law.
Yeah.
You're not trying in preaching the law to sinners. You're not trying to like expose one group and not another.
No.
It's just, when you preach the law to sinners,
You're exposing the truth about
sin.
sinners. All of them. And there is just a sense here. I mean, there's basically two ways you can respond to this preaching of the law that condemns you. You can either do what the Pharisees end up doing, which is rage against God, be angry at God, and want to do everything you can to get rid of this law-preaching God. Or you can acknowledge, as it says in verse 12, you can humble yourself and then trust that in Christ you will be exalted purely on account of Christ alone. That's your two options.
This shows you that even when you are a preacher, or in this case, instructor, I'd be interested. I haven't looked at the Greek there, but I'd be interested the difference between the two words he uses there when he says they preach and then the instructors here. But at the end of the day, when you're a preacher, what you're being told here is to preach Christ, right? Because if you're preaching something else, you're preaching a contrivance of your own making, and that contrivance of your own making may have like some similarities to things said in Scripture. But if you listen carefully to this, any of those preachings that you make are going to be burdens that are hard to bear, that you lay on people's shoulders, that you're unwilling to put on yourself. Because if you come up with it, you're going to find the things that you're pretty good at, and you're going to lay it on other people that you think aren't.
Well, and I think part of it too is that like they get up there and they preach all of this. Now, look, you could preach the law, which Jesus is here, and saddle that up on people, and then what is your job then? How do you then lift it? Well, by preaching the gospel, which of course these Pharisees are like never ever going to do.
Well,
of
we've
course,
been told they don't know it.
Yeah, they don't know it. They wouldn't know.
Yeah.
They wouldn't know what to say. Now, the other thing is that obviously some of these burdens that they're putting on people aren't even the law. They're just like made up stuff, right?
Yeah,
like this is not stuff that God has commanded. Whatever, they're just manufacturing stuff and placing that on top of people as well.
Yeah,
and this
speaking
is
of the Talmud, if you don't believe me, just check that book out.
Yeah, for sure. And here's the thing. I mean, it kind of starts with Jesus at the beginning of this when he says, "Listen, they sit on Moses' seat." So, observe the things that they say. That is, when they're reading from the Scriptures, listen. And that's where it ends. Don't listen to them after that. Don't do the stuff they do. None of that. So when they're reading from the Word of God, sitting in the seat of Moses, pay attention.
Yes.
After that, disregard it completely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good thing to notice there.
Yeah.
And we do have to end it right there because he's got 6 more of these bad boys coming.
We're just getting started.
Yeah, it doesn't get better for the Pharisees.
No.
So we will pick that up next episode. I'll see you guys then.
All right. Sounds good.